Hello everyone, welcome to Across the Balkans. I'm Nafisa Latic. The political crisis in Serbia is escalating after Prime Minister Milos Vucevic resigned amid growing unrest. His departure follows months-long student-led protests. The demonstrations across the country erupted in November after the deadly train station roof collapse in the city of Novi Sad, in which 15 people were killed. Tens of thousands of Serbians joined students in their protest against what they call deep-rooted corruption. Vucevic said he is stepping down to lower the tensions in the country after a group of men with baseball bats attacked students. Katarina Petrovic reports from Belgrade.
It all began when a railway station canopy collapsed and killed 15 people in the Serbian city of Novi Sad in November. Renovated twice under an infrastructure deal with Chinese companies, the tragedy exposed deep flaws in state-run projects. People were outraged, but it was the students who made it a nationwide call for change.
Mi smo odrasli u sistemu koji je koruptivan, da institucije uopšte ništa ne rade i nikad mi kao mladi ljudi, iako smo shvatali od uvek da nešto definitivno ne valja u ovoj državi, mi smo sad prvi put dobili šansu da pokušamo naš politički bunt.
13 people, including an ex-minister, have been charged, but the responsibility for deaths has not been determined. That was not enough for these young people. They have clear demands: transparency of the Novi Sad renovation, prosecution for protest violence, increased university funding, and the release of anyone detained during peaceful demonstrations. The students are saying their protest isn't just about the tragic accident. It's a generation's breaking point. They're risking everything, demanding justice and accountability in a country where corruption and neglect, they say, have been the norm for far too long. The weeks-long protests have spread to over 85 faculties across Serbia. With universities and many schools shut down for 2 months, the movement culminated into a general strike on January 24th. The strike shut down businesses, with tens of thousands flooding the streets. Numbers were difficult to determine. Major firms, theaters, cinemas, bookstores, and cultural institutions closed in solidarity, joined by lawyers' associations and farmers' unions.
Za mene je to nešto što mi je cilj borbe, da imamo neko bolje, normalnije, sigurnije društvo i da to zato što je nešto normalizovano kao pojava u našem društvu, da ne znači da to treba da bude dopušteno.
The students called on protesters to remain peaceful. They have faced increasing attacks on peaceful gatherings, including a driver ramming her car into protesters in Belgrade. On the same day of the general strike, thousands gathered in the Serbian town of Jagodina to support the President Aleksandar Vučić and counter the protest that challenged his authority. He dismissed the protests as politically driven and influenced by foreign agents due to his close ties with Russia and China.
Znaju naši ljudi, zna naš narod, zna moja Srbija kako je napadnuta danas, kako je napadnuta spolja i iznutra.
The protests have only grown stronger since then. Students have set up tents and barricades, creating a 24-hour blockade at Autokomanda, one of Belgrade's major traffic intersections. Vučić promised to fulfill their demands and make changes in his government.
I zato je moj zahtev za što hitnijom i ogromnom rekonstrukcijom vlade Srbije, jer i u ovim teškim vremenima političkim pokazalo se ko je spreman i da se bori, ko nije, ko je spreman da radi, ko nije, ko se sakrije u mišju rupu, ko nije. I u skladu sa tim očekujem da više od 50% aktuelnih ministara bude zamenjeno u jednoj veoma hitnoj rekonstrukciji.
Hours after he called for easing tensions, a group of men, allegedly from the ruling Serbian Progressive Party, attacked students in Novi Sad with baseball bats, seriously injuring a young woman who was hospitalized. This sparked a political fallout, leading to the resignations of Prime Minister Milos Vucevic, followed by Novi Sad Mayor Milan Đurić. The country has a long history of protest, including the student-led movement that overthrew Slobodan Milošević in 2000. Jovana has been protesting since she was 12 during the 90s. She says this push for change is different than any in recent years.
Mislim da ovi ljudi sada zapravo znaju kako da promene sistem i da učine da ova naša lepa zemlja nastavi napred i da bude stvorena ponovo na nekim pravim vrednostima.
Društvene promjene su se svakako desile. Vidimo da mladi nisu apolitični, da nisu letargični, da su zapravo vrlo aktivni i vrlo zainteresovani u svemu ovome. Ne samo da smo podcenjeni kao generacija, nego smo svi ušokirani. Čak i mi koji smo dugogodišnje slušali kako smo mi apolitični, smo šokirani koliki to veliki odjek ima u javnosti.
Many protesters believe the canopy collapse was the result of deep-rooted government corruption. They say they won't stop until officials reveal who is to blame for the Novi Sad tragedy and the recent violence during the protests and hold them accountable. These are the largest protests since Vučić took power over a decade ago. The EU and other international organizations often criticize him for curbing democratic freedoms and failing to align with EU foreign policy despite seeking to join the bloc. But now he faces his most serious challenge yet. Student campuses have become hubs of resistance, turning outrage into a generational fight against corruption. A pivotal moment in Serbia's history. Katarina Petrović, Across the Balkans, Belgrade.
A lot to discuss about what's going on in Serbia. Let's bring in Jovica Pavlović. He is in Belgrade for us. He is a research associate at the Institute of European Studies. Jovica, great to have you with us on TRT World. Let me start by saying, you know, the resignations happened, but it seems to me that the tensions are not going away and the students will keep protesting. They said, this is not what we wanted. So what did they want, actually?
We had abrupt resignation of the Prime Minister of Serbia after 3 months of protests due to the tragedy, the fall of the canopy at the train station in Novi Sad. And the resignation came in, at least the government framed it as such, as a response to the students' demands for the accountability for the corruption that, as they say, led to the fall of the canopy at the train station. However, what the government has forgot to say is, besides the political responsibility, the students are also demanding criminal charges and, let's say, criminal prosecution for the corruption. So in that sense, there was celebratory atmosphere in Belgrade among the students and other protesters yesterday as the government and the Prime Minister announced their resignation. However, it does not seem that the students will be satisfied with this as the only outcome of their protests, and I'm sure that they will continue with the protests with even more enthusiasm, as now, for the first time perhaps, during the protests, they have seen that they can bring about serious political consequences, because the fall of the government is not a small consequence, even though it is not the end of their demands.
Right, exactly. It's a huge thing to happen, especially in the Balkans, where we are not used to young people taking their fate into their hands, if I might say like that. So the thing is here, it's been 3 months since that deadly roof collapsed. So why is it such a big deal for the government to find out who exactly is to blame and fulfill this demand for students? What's wrong with the investigation? Yeah.
Yes, the thing is, what you mentioned at the very start, it's very important that it's young people asking for these changes, because the demonstrations up until now, this is not the first political crisis in Serbia during the last 12 years since the Serbian Progressive Party has been in power. It's mostly been led by the people who were disappointed with the transition, so older generations. Now, for the first time, we have a new generation asking for some changes. Why are they still asking for changes, and why are they not satisfied? Well, it's because this is also, it has the whole protests have a political aspect. So they want to demand that the institutions do their job. They're not happy with the current constellation of political relations in Serbia, where all the power resides basically de facto with the president. They want to see accountable institutions that are ready to conduct the jobs that they have, and these protests are more aimed at those institutions than the president or any other political figure themselves. What the students mention mostly is Zagorka Dalovac, so the main persecutor of Serbia, who has remained silent up until this point. And it's been 3 months, as you mentioned, since the fall of the roof in Novi Sad. So the protests continue because the students want to see those demands fulfilled. What has also happened is that during the demonstrations, there have been many responses by the government to this protests. Many students have been arrested. So there have been new demands piling up, which want to see their comrades freed and so on.
What I want us to clarify here, as I've seen a lot of international media reporting this as some kind of demand for the president to resign. This is not what they're asking. They are just asking for the constitution of Serbia to be respected and the institutions to function. But can this government, well now, I mean, we've lost this government, didn't we? But can President Vucic, let's talk about him, deliver this to them? Is he capable of doing that?
The whole issue of the demonstration is that nobody is actually speaking to Vucic per se, even though President Vucic wants to put him center stage, as this is his way of solving political crises, always bringing the attention to himself. But the students this time are saying, well, thank you very much, Mr. President, but we are not communicating to you. We want to speak to the institutions who are designated for solving the issues that we have, and in this case, it's the issue of corruption. So Vucic will try anything and everything in order to bring the attention back to the political sphere, back to him. But I believe that this will not go well with the students, because one of their paroles is you're not the legitimate institution to solve the issues that we're talking about. So it's this interplay between Vucic, who wants to be the one who solves everything in Serbia, and the students who want the institutions who are designated for this to solve these problems.
Who are actually saying you cannot have all the power, let the institutions do the job. I think that's the key point here for us to clarify, as I think there's been a lot of confusion about what actually these young people want. One other thing I wanted to ask you, since the beginning of the protest, President Vucic, now as well as the, well, let's say former Prime Minister Vucevic, who will stay until the situation is solved, they both blamed foreign actors for intervening in Serbia. But students say this has nothing to do with anyone abroad. So what is actually President Vucic referring to when he says there are foreign powers who are involved in this?
This is a tactical ploy that has been employed by this president and the government in leaving many times. So anytime there's a political crisis, they bring back this rhetoric from the 90s, which actually Slobodan Milosevic quite successfully used to keep himself in power, saying that if my government or if my rule falls, then we will have all these foreigners intervening in our country. And this rhetoric only resonates with the older generation and with Vucic's voters who see him as a successor to Milosevic. The students are not understanding what he's talking about, because these are, according to them, and most likely true, grassroots movements which actually have no foreign support. What makes this even more contradictory is that if we look at the foreign statements that have come about the situation in Serbia, most of the foreign governments, both from the East and the West, both the United States and Russia and China, have actually been very supportive of the Serbian government and Vucic himself in solving this situation. So I wouldn't give much thought to the claims that there's any foreign intervention in this sense. It's just another rhetorical ploy by Vucic in trying to push blame away from himself and onto somebody else.
I have 20 seconds left, but Jovice, tell me briefly, did these protests change the political scene in Serbia forever? Because, and not just in Serbia, in the Balkans, does this show the power that young people actually have?
Briefly, to sum up, yes, there has been a new generation which is getting politically active, and there will be, I suppose, many changes to come because of this.
Thank you so much, Jovica, for explaining this to us. Thanks for being our guest.